Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon news update for October 1st, 2024. Let's start off today with talking about what the Mormon Church, is doing to try and keep people in. An article from the Salt Lake Tribune says denominational institutions in the United States have had a bad go of late. According to a host of surveys, the fastest growing religious identity is the nones, or those who refuse allegiance to a particular church. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has not been immune from these cultural currents. While the Utah-based faith has done comparatively well when placed among other major traditions, anecdotal and polling evidence shows younger Latter-day Saints have been leaving the fold in substantial numbers. Latter-day Saint leaders have experimented with several methods to better seal their anti-institutional generations to the institution. They have attempted to be more transparent about thorny historical topics. They have revamped the youth program. They have launched large weekend single adult gatherings. Something it doesn't mention is that they also lowered the age at which young adults can serve missions. But in terms of money and resources, one initiative appears at the center of Church President Russell M. Nelson's vision for binding members to the faith: temple construction. It has been hard to ignore the expedited rate for temple construction in recent years. Since Nelson became the faith's leader in 2018, he has announced 168 new temples, more than doubling those sacred structures already in existence. While some newer temples feature a more streamlined and therefore cost-effective model, they all cost millions of dollars. Some come with an especially hefty price tag. Idaho's recently completed Pocatello Temple, for instance, cost nearly $70 million. Its limestone flooring came from Bethlehem, and the wooden doors from the Congo River region of Africa. The faithful believe these extravagant flourishes are justified as a testament to their devotion and a signal of the site's spiritual significance. Yes, because Jesus is known to have spent the majority of his life in ostentatious buildings. These expenditures are also enabled by the faith's investment portfolio, which is estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Indeed, the temple spending spree has come to justify the faith's financial reserves. Leaders have shifted from defending their vast savings as a rainy day fund to instead explaining that the money facilitates these sacred structures. Yet providing a reason for accrued accounts is far from the only impetus for temples increasingly dotting the earth. Their construction costs also appear to be an investment in Nelson's hope for how to retain members in an era of disengagement. While many of the recently announced locations will serve Latter-day Saints who previously did not have convenient access to a temple, a substantial number will be in areas that were not starved for an additional sacred structure. Can they stop saying sacred structure? Especially in America, both Dallas and Houston areas received second temples. 12 more were announced for Utah, 30 are now built or planned, including in cities that were already home to large and somewhat underused sanctuaries. There may come a day when Latter-day Saint temples dot the Wasatch Front akin to the faith's chapels. There is an institutional hope expressed in each of these announcements, a reason for expending billions in construction costs. The temples in church leaders' minds should serve as an anchor for each community in a sea of disaffiliation. That is because they not only draw from financial reserves but also require local investment. Each temple requires substantial buy-in from the area's congregations. Members are not only encouraged to attend as patrons, but also staff the structures as volunteers. They're assigned as ordinance workers, participate in ward temple outings, and arrange youth temple trips. They're informed when attendance is waning and sometimes tasked with participation quotas. They're expected to do family history research, discover names that lack salvific ordinances, and then go on their behalf. There is no excuse not to, after all, given the building is just down the street. And remember, the church put trust in the town when they decided to build these structures at a substantial price. Temple work is seen as a privilege. I know the church would never put these numbers out there, but I do wonder what actual temple attendance numbers look like. Nelson likely hopes that these temples will retroactively spur the activity that would have justified their construction in the first place. They're physically tokens of his optimistic faith that the church can avoid the fate of so many of America's mainline churches whose congregants are leaving in droves. If you build it, the voice told Kevin Costner's Ray Kinsella in Field of Dreams, they will come. If we build them, Nelson seems to be urging, they will remain. I have been looking for a reason why the church is building so many temples and why they're being so adamant about building them in places where the temples really aren't wanted. Do you think this article explains that? Do you think that the top leaders believe that temple building will keep people, especially young people, in the church? Now let's go to an update about Nemo the Mormon. A few days ago, Nemo the Mormon, a prolific and well-loved Mormon social media influencer, attended the disciplinary council or church court he was called to by his stake presidency. The letter he received calling him to the court stated the reasons for the court in this way. This council will consider your public statements as well as reported conduct that together suggest you have A. repeatedly acted in clear and deliberate public opposition to the church, its doctrine, and its leaders, and B. engaged in a pattern of intentionally working to weaken the faith and activity of church members, either of which, if established, could constitute apostasy. Let's watch a short video of Nemo's feelings after he left the completed court. Keep in mind that the laws in his area prohibited him from recording the proceedings.
Hi everyone.
How are you doing?
I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry, you're not going to get much out of me tonight. Apologies. It was rough. It was a rough night. It was I got everything out I wanted to say. My defense was about 8,500 words long, and they did give me the time to finish it. So that was good of them. They are going to sit now in deliberation, and I should hear in the next couple of days what the outcome will be. And other than that, I don't really know how to feel. Nothing prepares you for the emotions. Well, you all tried to warn me, and my bluster has brought me this far. But I think I do need a couple of days to reflect. It'll be difficult awaiting the decision, but particularly once the decision's there, I will be taking some time to reflect on it and look at what the future holds for me. Some of the charges are more sensitive than I thought they would be, that were brought against me, more covert than I thought they would be. They are to do with individual communications between me and individuals that have somehow made their way into the hands of stake leadership. And so I wasn't prepared for that. And I feel I managed to defend those communications, but I don't want to say any more about them because they are personal between me and an individual. And my wife was with me, a member of the ward was with me, who was able to stand up in my behalf. My eldest quorum president very kindly sat with me and supported me. And the stake president was there, no High Council. They wouldn't allow the High Council to be there. Thank you to everyone who watches, who reminds me that what I do is helpful to them, who lets me know that it has an impact in their life. I'm honoured to have been able to go through these processes, to go through the experiences I've gone through, knowing that what happens to me informs other people and sometimes keeps other people safe and means it doesn't happen to them. People understand exactly what it is that they're involved with when it comes to the church and its procedures. There's a fair-sized vigil, which is nice. It's nice to have some people outside, and the church doesn't seem to be too upset by its presence. I don't know if you guys have had any trouble from the inside the building. So everyone's been cordial, and it's all been very respectful, and I'm very glad that everyone that's turned up has behaved well and is there to support me and not necessarily cast stones at the church. There was an amended document that was signed for him that allowed him to take notes. He was agreeing not to take notes apart from those in his capacity. And I said, well, unfortunately, my contract is in conflict with his contract because I'm not to permit anyone to take notes. And so I can't permit him to do so. And so a modification was made to the contract to allow the state clerk to make notes. But they recognized the conflict in what they presented me with, and they amended it. I was allowed to make notes of the meeting and of my defense of them. Sort of as they were accusing me, I was allowed to take notes of those accusations so I could properly respond. So that was good. They didn't have a lot that I hadn't already anticipated. All 1,145 emails that I received in my support have been shared with the state presidency.
Was there any inkling that they were going to bring in those personal communications with an individual?
No, not at all. So, again, I don't want to get into that
that's
too
fair
much.
enough,
Yeah.
But that's an ambush,
Yeah.
You already...
This whole thing was an ambush.
Yeah.
As of yesterday, September 30th, Nemo had still not been handed a verdict. Here are his thoughts on that.
22 hours since I emerged from my church disciplinary council. And while so many of you have been reaching out with messages of support and goodwill, one group of individuals has been notably silent. That would be my stake presidency. They have still not passed down judgment upon me, and I can only hope that is because my defence and submitted evidence has really got them thinking, and hopefully I will retain my membership.
I guess we will see what happens. And now we will go to the ex-Mormon subreddit where 5 months ago someone posted the following under the title, Mission President Being Sued. It says, there's obviously more to this story to come out, but from the mouth of a missionary that served there, not me but a friend, the last mission president for Adelaide, Australia, may be being taken to court for his abusive behavior towards the missionaries. He would publicly humiliate the missionaries. He would walk into their apartments at any time for surprise visits and rummage through their things looking for contraband. He would demand they hand over their phones and look at history, etc. Apparently, an above-average number of missionaries left that mission early, suffering from mental health issues brought on by this guy. Anybody have more to this story? I have looked around and have not been able to find any follow-up on this story other than Adolf and Martha Johansson were called to serve as mission president and wife of mission president in Adelaide, Australia in January of 2021, and released right around the time this post went up 5 months ago in April of 2024. If you have firsthand knowledge of this that you are willing to share, I would love to hear from you. Email me at generallyunquotable@gmail.com. Mormon missions can be incredibly traumatic and also abusive, and if this is happening, I would love to shed a light on it. Also from the Ex-Mormon subreddit, a post entitled Human Trafficking. For work, I have to take a training on combating human trafficking. I came across this passage from U.S. federal regulations. The United States government has adopted a policy prohibiting trafficking in persons, including the trafficking-related activities of this clause. Contractors, contractor employees, and their agents shall not destroy, conceal, confiscate, or otherwise deny access by an employee to the employee's identity or immigration documents, such as passports or driver's licenses, regardless of issuing authority. In other words, taking a missionary's passport from him and keeping it in the mission home is a form of human trafficking. Any missionary should report this practice to the U.S. Embassy if he's abroad. This is probably true of missionaries from many other countries living outside their home nation. As an adult, missionaries have the right to come and go as they please. The mission president trying to coerce missionaries to stay, especially by seizing their personal documents, is illegal. It's probably illegal in most countries, but it's definitely illegal against U.S. citizens. And now we will go to High Country News for an article with the title, What the Bundy Bunkerville Standoff Foreshadowed. In 2014, Cliven Bundy became the most notorious holdout of the Sagebrush Rebellion, a 1980s movement in which some Western ranchers pushed unsuccessfully for the transfer of land ownership from federal control to state hands. Ironically, Bundy's own ability to ranch depended on federal lands. The 160 acres he owned wasn't nearly enough to sustain a herd of livestock, especially in the Nevada desert. But when Bundy called into the YouTube show, he talked about having to pay the government to use those federal lands, calling it government tyranny. His brewing standoff in Bunkerville, he said, had the potential to be the next Waco or Ruby Ridge. Bundy's mention of these incidents lit a fire under the modern militia movement. Since the early 1990s, this movement, according to the Anti-Defamation League, has particularly focused on gun control and deadly standoffs between civilians and federal agents, catalyzed by the belief that the federal government is collaborating with a shadowy conspiracy, the so-called New World Order, to strip Americans of their rights. Militias were not alone in their support for the Bundys. Conservative members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormons, sovereign citizens, constitutional sheriffs, lawmakers, and extremists from across the West all raced toward Bunkerville, where very odd ideological bedfellows found common cause in their rage against the government, said Benjamin Park, Associate Professor of History at Sam Houston State University and author of American Zion, A New History of Mormonism. Their worldview found a platform when major media outlets like CNN and Fox News broadcast live from the standoff. Portrayals of Bundy as a martyr demonstrated to some of these far-right ultra-libertarian types that there's a form of their message that can get public support. Amy Cooter of the Center of Terrorism, Extremism, and Counterterrorism at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies said, such a public mouthpiece for those ideas definitely normalized them and legitimized them in the public sphere. People who saw Bundy as a victim of government overreach began to see merit in some of his other, lesser-known views. For instance, Cliven Bundy, a devout Mormon, interpreted LDS scripture in a way that many church members consider eccentric. In his writings, Bundy professed a reverence for ultra-conservative LDS Church President Ezra Taft Benson and the belief that Mormons will save the U.S. Constitution from ruin. I actually follow an Instagram account that still believes this and posts about it regularly. But Cooter said the Bundys' unconventional religious views were generally downplayed. 10 years later, people may forget some of the eccentricities of the Bundys, she said. Scholars have long studied the particular flavor of conservatism that has thrived among the Mormon subcultures of the Mountain West. the Mormon Corridor. In 2003, John Charles Duffy, now a professor at Miami University, wrote in Sunstone magazine that some members of the LDS Church resisted the changes in the 20th century that were aimed at making the faith more palatable to a wider audience. The older hardline tradition of constitutionalism, coupled with accusations of government tyranny, has survived in an LDS subculture devoted to ultra-conservative politics. As the standoff played out, Park recognized Bundy's rhetoric. There's always been these people who see the government as a threat and represent this vision of we're going to save the Constitution when it's hanging by a thread, even if that means taking on the recognized government authorities, he said. And in publicly proclaiming their beliefs and tying their ideology to the standoff, the Bundys moved the boundaries of what's expected Mormon political discourse, Park said. He pointed to the Utah legislature. You see a lot of far-right Mormon conservative voices, Park said, who don't go fully Bundy, but they're willing to go half Bundy. They're willing to take advantage of this anxiety. In 2022, the Deseret News, a newspaper owned by the LDS Church, reported on an emerging pattern of public protest driven by conspiracy theories that had recently emerged in the Utah legislature. A deep distrust in the federal government and also a broad agreement with deep state conspiracies, Park said, became the norm. Still, lawmakers from around the region declared their support for the Bundys. Several of them remain in office today, including Arizona Representative Paul Gosar and Idaho State Representative Heather Scott. Former Graham County, Arizona Sheriff Richard Mack saw his star rise too. A Mormon, Mack founded the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association in 2011, espousing the belief that county sheriffs are the nation's highest law enforcement power. Before Bunkerville, the group drew little notice, but afterward, both CSPOA and Mack were more widely embraced. CSPOA instructs county sheriffs to protect their citizens from the overreach of an out-of-control federal government by refusing to enforce any laws they deemed unconstitutional or unjust. Ultimately, Bundy Ranch was a really powerful and important example of domestic extremism and how circumstances can align in ways that lead to broad support. There weren't thousands of people at the Bunkerville standoff, but 7 years later on January 6th, thousands arrived in Washington, D.C. The anti-government and ultra-conservative Mormon beliefs that were so key to the Bundy standoff are deeply rooted in Western identity. The Bundy story appealed to a shared rural mentality, Cooter said, that is prized by militia groups. An old white man in a cowboy hat complaining about government overreach was essentially an ideal story for them, a narrative that reinforced that frontier piece of masculinity. Days after the standoff, Cliven Bundy famously made racist comments about Black Americans. I've often wondered, are they better off as slaves, picking cotton and having a family life and doing things, or are they better off under government subsidy? The comments revealed the underlying false sense of oppression and victimhood held by Bundy and his supporters. They see themselves as an imperiled minority. Park, the historian, saw the Bundys' refusal to acknowledge indigenous land rights when they talked about Western land ownership as another nod to that conservative brand of Mormonism. That manifest destiny ideology, of course, is widespread in America, he said, but it had a particularly Mormon flavor because they believed this is a land that God had prepared for us. And by us, they mean true, active, believing Mormons. I actually remember being taught that a lot when I was growing up, and when I was reading the Book of Mormon as a child, I read through scriptures that sounded like Columbus coming to the U.S., and in my mind, I was like, the Book of Mormon is talking about Columbus coming here because it wants me to remember how important the U.S. is for the Mormon church to flourish. I honestly believed that settlers came to the U.S. so that God could establish his true church through Mormonism in a land with freedom of religion. And today we will finish up with this tiny bit of wisdom from Riley, who says, "It's so weird being raised by Christians and spending your entire childhood being told to care about others. Then one day they're just like, you're not actually supposed to care about others, you stupid socialist." And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.